Have you ever felt an unexplained resistance inside yourself, as if there's a part of you that secretly works against your best intentions? You set a goal, you promise yourself you'll change, you even feel the excitement of a fresh start. Yet, just when you're about to take that crucial step, a subtle voice whispers doubts, a sudden impulse distracts you, or an old pattern quietly pulls you back. It almost feels like a hidden double lives inside your chest, invisible but powerful, steering you in directions you never consciously chose. Carl Jung called this mysterious presence the shadow. The shadow is not just the side of you that makes mistakes or gets angry from time to time. It is deeper, older, and far more cunning. It contains every thought, emotion, and impulse you've been told was unacceptable. From the moment you were a child, you were taught which parts of yourself were worthy of love and which were not. Maybe you were told that boys shouldn't cry, so your sadness slipped underground. Maybe you learned that anger was dangerous, so you buried it beneath politeness. Maybe you discovered that ambition made others jealous, so you covered it with humility. These parts never disappeared. They were simply exiled, waiting in the dark corners of your unconscious mind. Imagine your psyche as a house. The front rooms are spotless and decorated for guests. This is your persona, the mask you show the world. But down in the basement, behind a locked door, lies everything you've hidden. Old resentments, raw desires, forbidden fantasies, unexpressed creativity, all of it piles up there. And like a basement you never visit, the shadow begins to smell, to leak, to creak in the night. The more you pretend it doesn't exist, the louder it rattles its chains. Jung believed that ignoring the shadow is one of the greatest dangers in human life. Why? Because what we refuse to face inside ourselves doesn't just vanish. It grows in the dark, building pressure, until one day it bursts out in ways we don't expect. Maybe it appears as uncontrollable rage at someone you love. Maybe it shows up as an addiction you swore you'd never fall into. Maybe it becomes a quiet depression that makes life feel empty, even when everything looks fine on the outside. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." But here's the paradox. The shadow is not only destructive. Hidden inside it is also your vitality, your passion, your creativity, even your strength. Think of a forest at night. It is dark, full of strange sounds, and maybe even terrifying. But it is also alive with mystery, energy, and the possibility of discovery. The shadow is the part of you that holds everything you suppressed, including the gold you never allowed yourself to claim. To meet your shadow is not to destroy yourself, but to become whole. If you look at myths, legends, and even modern movies, you will see the shadow archetype everywhere. In ancient stories it appears as the dark brother, the cursed twin, the trickster who causes chaos. In films it takes the form of villains who mirror the hero's flaws. Darth Vader to Luke Skywalker, the Joker to Batman, or even Gollum to Frodo. These figures terrify us, not because they are foreign, but because they are familiar. They represent the disowned pieces of our own humanity. The shadow archetype is universal, because every human being has a double. When you deny your shadow, you project it onto others. You start to see in them the very qualities you cannot admit in yourself. The person you hate for being arrogant may simply mirror the ambition you've repressed. The colleague you label lazy might remind you of the part of yourself that longs for rest. The politician, celebrity, or neighbor you demonize may actually carry pieces of your own shadow. This is why Jung urged us to be cautious about our strongest judgments. Often, the people who trigger us most are showing us something about ourselves we're not ready to see. Facing the shadow is uncomfortable because it means admitting that we are not as pure, as perfect, or as consistent as we like to believe. But it is also liberating, because it frees us from the exhausting act of pretending. When you recognize your anger, you can use it to protect your boundaries. When you face your envy, you can see what desires you've neglected. When you allow yourself to feel sadness, you can connect more deeply with others. Integrating the shadow is not about indulging in destructive behavior. It is about reclaiming your lost humanity, piece by piece. And so the shadow archetype is not your enemy. It is your dark twin, the forgotten sibling who has been knocking at the door of your consciousness for years. To ignore it is to remain divided, trapped in a cycle of repeating patterns. To meet it is to step into the dangerous but transformative work of becoming whole. Every human being who ever sought truth has had to walk through this valley of shadows. The question is, will you dare to open the basement door and see what's waiting for you in the dark? In today's world, the shadow is not a distant myth or abstract concept. It shows up every day in ways we often fail to recognize. Think about the rising levels of stress, the hidden addictions, the silent battles with depression, or the anger that explodes on social media. Beneath the surface, These are signs of something deeper, parts of ourselves that were never allowed a voice. In American culture especially, there is immense pressure to present a flawless image, always productive, always confident, always in control. But when we wear that mask too tightly, the shadow swells in silence until it erupts in ways we can't predict. This is why the shadow archetype matters right now. For someone in their 20s, it might appear as anxiety about fitting in, as the constant comparison on Instagram, as the secret shame of not being good enough. For someone in their 30s or 40s, it may take the form of workaholism, chasing success to cover inner emptiness, or the midlife crisis when the old mask no longer fits. And for someone in their 50s or 60s, the shadow might whisper regrets, unresolved anger toward family, or the fear of aging that no plastic surgery can erase. No matter the age, the shadow walks beside us, shaping our choices when we least expect it. Consider how often people in America talk about burnout. It is not just exhaustion from work. Burnout is often the shadow telling us we've ignored our real needs for too long. Or think about the culture of constant consumption: food, alcohol, online shopping, endless scrolling. Many of these habits are attempts to numb the parts of ourselves we don't want to feel. We bury pain with entertainment, loneliness with noise, and fear with distractions. Yet the more we avoid the shadow, the more control it gains over us. Jung's insight is revolutionary here. The shadow isn't only negative. Within the shadow hides not just rage or shame, but also our unused strength, creativity, and passion. The American worker who has been told to stay in line may repress their artistic side, only to feel restless and bitter later. The woman who was raised to be quiet and agreeable may bury her assertiveness, only to explode in sudden anger when her boundaries are crossed. The man who was taught never to show vulnerability may repress tenderness, only to feel disconnected from his own children. Every cultural rule about what is acceptable creates shadows that eventually seek their release. You can even see this in politics and public life. Whole groups project their shadows onto others, blaming immigrants for their fears, attacking minorities for qualities they cannot face in themselves, demonizing leaders as symbols of their own rejected traits. Jung's warning was clear: when a society refuses to deal with its shadow, it risks being consumed by it. Wars, violence, and division often grow from collective shadows denied for too long, and yet, in this darkness, there is hope. People across the United States and the world are beginning to explore therapy, mindfulness, shadow work, and spiritual practices. They are asking deeper questions. Why do I repeat the same patterns? Why do I fear success? Why do I sabotage love? These are shadow questions, and they open the door to transformation. To face the shadow is to become honest with yourself, to stop running, and to begin reclaiming the parts of you that have waited for years to be seen. What makes this so relevant to modern culture is the hunger for authenticity. People are tired of fake smiles, endless hustle, and curated perfection. They long for something real, raw, emotion, true connection, the courage to say, "This is who I am, flaws and all." Jung believed that by integrating the shadow, we move closer to that authenticity. We no longer have to split ourselves between the acceptable and the unacceptable. We can be whole. So when you notice yourself judging someone harshly, pause. Ask, what part of me am I really reacting to? When you find yourself trapped in an old habit, don't just blame your weakness. Ask, what unacknowledged need is hiding here? These questions are uncomfortable, but they are the beginning of freedom. The shadow archetype becomes relevant not only in psychology textbooks, but in your relationships, your career, your health, and your future. The truth is, the shadow is as American as it is universal. It lives in the pressure to be successful, in the fear of being vulnerable, in the desperate chase for endless growth. It lives in you, and in me, and in everyone who has ever struggled between who they are and who they pretend to be. Jung's work remains urgent today because the shadow is not going away. The only choice we have is whether to face it consciously or let it control us in silence. The shadow becomes clearer when we understand what Carl Jung really meant by it. In simple terms, the shadow archetype is the collection of everything about ourselves that we push out of sight because we believe it is unacceptable, shameful, or dangerous. This doesn't only include qualities we think of as bad, like anger, jealousy, greed, or lust. It can also include positive qualities that were discouraged in our upbringing: confidence, ambition, independence, or sensitivity. Anything we repress because it doesn't fit our image of who we're supposed to be gets stored in the shadow. To explain it, Jung often contrasted the shadow with the persona. The persona is the mask you wear to interact with society. It's the polished version of yourself, polite, professional, likable. If your psyche is a stage, the persona is the actor in costume under the bright lights. The shadow, on the other hand, is what happens behind the curtain. It is the backstage mess, the unspoken thoughts, the raw impulses, the feelings you'd rather no one ever knew. You can pretend the shadow isn't there, but the play can't go on without it. One of the easiest ways to recognize the shadow is through projection. Imagine meeting someone and instantly disliking them for no clear reason. Maybe you find them arrogant, selfish, or manipulative. Jung would say, look closer. Very often, what irritates you most in others reflects qualities you can't admit in yourself. The shadow sneaks into your perception, and instead of seeing it within, you throw it onto another person. This is why self-awareness is so difficult, because the shadow hides behind the faces of those we criticize. Another way to spot the shadow is in moments of overreaction. Have you ever exploded in anger over something small, surprising even yourself, or felt waves of jealousy that seemed out of proportion? That intensity often signals the shadow breaking through. The emotions feel overwhelming because they come from the unconscious, carrying the weight of years of repression. In daily life, this means the shadow shows up in our most embarrassing slips of the tongue, our sudden moods, our secret fantasies, and the habits we can't break. But Jung never suggested that the shadow should be destroyed. Quite the opposite. He saw it as a crucial source of energy and growth. Think of a volcano. Beneath the mountain lies molten lava, dangerous and unpredictable. But that same lava, once cooled, becomes fertile ground for life. The shadow is like that, chaotic when denied, but rich with potential when integrated. Inside your anger might be the power to defend yourself. Inside your jealousy might be the clue to what you really desire. Inside your fear might be the doorway to courage. In myths and stories, the shadow archetype often appears as the villain or the dark twin. These figures challenge the hero, forcing them to grow. The Greek god Hades ruled the underworld, terrifying but essential for the cycle of life and death. In Native American traditions, the trickster disrupts order, teaching wisdom through chaos. In modern culture, we see it in characters like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or in the dark side of superheroes. These stories endure because they mirror a truth within us. To become whole, we must meet our darker half. Jung also noted that the shadow is not only personal but collective. Each culture has traits it praises and traits it condemns. In America, for example, individualism and ambition are often celebrated, while vulnerability or dependence may be shamed. As a result, many people repress their softer, emotional side, creating a collective shadow that shows up as loneliness, isolation, and disconnection. This means working with the shadow is not just a personal task but a cultural one. So how do we begin to approach this archetype? The first step is recognition. You can't integrate what you refuse to see. Paying attention to your dreams is one way, since the unconscious often reveals shadow material in symbolic form. Another is noticing your triggers, moments when you feel an exaggerated emotional reaction. Instead of pushing those feelings away, ask, what is this showing me about myself? The shadow archetype is like a hidden library inside your soul. The books may look dusty, frightening, or forbidden, but inside them are stories you need to read. Without them, your life narrative is incomplete. Jung's vision was that by turning toward the shadow, you don't become darker, you become fuller. You learn to hold both light and darkness, realizing that true maturity is not about being flawless, but about being whole. When we think of the shadow as our dark twin, it becomes less an enemy and more a mirror. A twin can frustrate us, rival us, even terrify us, but they also belong to us, and without them, we are only half alive. By understanding the shadow archetype, we begin the lifelong work of integrating the pieces we left behind, stepping closer to the wholeness that Jung called individuation. If the shadow is our dark twin, then the real question becomes, how do we live with it? Knowing the concept is one thing, bringing it into daily life is another. Jung believed that integration begins with awareness. Every time you feel a strong emotional reaction, every time you find yourself judging someone harshly, every time you repeat a pattern you swore to break, that is the shadow knocking on your door. The first step is not to slam the door shut, but to pause and listen. In practical terms, one way to meet the shadow is through journaling. Write down the emotions you least want to admit. Put on paper the thoughts you're afraid someone else might read. Even if you never share them, simply acknowledging them reduces their power. Another way is through dreams. Jung saw dreams as messages from the unconscious, often populated with shadow figures, monsters, rivals, strangers who threaten or tempt. Instead of dismissing these dreams, reflect on what part of yourself they might represent. Relationships are also a mirror for shadow work. The people closest to us often trigger the deepest reactions. Instead of only blaming them, we can ask, what is this conflict teaching me about my own hidden side? For example, if your partner's independence makes you furious, could it be pointing to the independence you fear in yourself? If your friend's success stirs envy, might it highlight ambitions you've buried? These reflections are uncomfortable, but they open the door to transformation. In American culture, where self-image is carefully curated through social media and professional identity, shadow work offers a radical kind of honesty. Instead of polishing the mask, you turn to the cracks beneath it. This doesn't mean broadcasting your flaws to the world. It means owning them privately, then choosing how to express them in healthier ways. For instance, recognizing your anger doesn't mean lashing out. It means learning to channel that fire into assertiveness, boundary setting, or advocacy. Recognizing your sadness doesn't mean drowning in it. It means allowing yourself to grieve so you can also allow yourself to heal. Therapy, especially Jungian or depth psychology, can be a powerful container for this process. A skilled therapist helps you confront the shadow without being overwhelmed by it. But you don't always need a professional to begin. Practices like mindfulness, meditation, and creative expression, painting, music, storytelling can allow shadow material to surface safely. Sometimes drawing a picture of your fear or writing a dialogue with your anger gives it a voice without letting it take over your actions. The shadow also shows up in collective spaces. Think about workplace culture. The drive for constant productivity often represses rest, play, or creativity. As a result, burnout spreads like wildfire. By naming this shadow, teams and leaders can choose healthier rhythms. Or think about families. A parent who refuses to admit their vulnerability might demand perfection from children, passing the shadow down like an inheritance. By recognizing this pattern, cycles can finally be broken. One of Jung's most profound insights was that the shadow contains not just darkness, but also unclaimed light. This means that when you do shadow work, you don't only recover your wounds, you also recover your gifts. The child who was told not to be too loud might rediscover the gift of performance or leadership. The teenager shamed for being too sensitive might reclaim the gift of empathy and intuition. The adult who buried ambition to avoid envy might finally allow themselves to pursue their true calling. Each piece of the shadow, once integrated, becomes a source of strength. Imagine what would happen if, instead of fearing these hidden parts, we learned to walk beside them. Your anger could teach you courage. Your envy could guide you to your desires. Your fear could reveal what matters most. Integration doesn't happen overnight. It is a lifelong journey of noticing, reflecting, and embracing. But every small step brings more authenticity. This is not easy work. It requires humility to admit you are not only the mask you show to the world. It requires patience to face impulses that feel shameful. It requires compassion to forgive yourself for being human. Yet this is the very path that leads to freedom. Without integration, you live split, one part in the light, one part in the dark. With integration, you live wholeable to hold both sides without being torn apart. So when the shadow rises in your life, don't rush to silence it. Don't bury it under busyness or drown it in distraction. Stop, listen, ask what it wants you to see. Then, slowly, invite it to walk with you. Because the shadow is not here to destroy you. It is here to complete you. And only by welcoming your dark twin can you finally step into the fullness of who you are. When you begin to integrate the shadow, something remarkable happens. Life starts to feel more real. Instead of living split between a polished exterior and a secret inner storm, you begin to carry both light and darkness with honesty. Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming whole. Individuation isn't about perfection, it's about union. You no longer waste energy denying half of yourself. That energy can now be used for growth, creativity, and authentic connection. Think about how relationships change when the shadow is acknowledged. Instead of blaming your partner for all the conflicts, you begin to see how your own unconscious patterns contribute. Instead of being controlled by jealousy, you can admit it and use it as a guide to your hidden desires. Instead of demanding that others mirror only your ideal self, you can accept them as mirrors of your whole self, both light and shadow. This deepens intimacy, because true intimacy requires truth. Work also takes on new meaning. Many people climb ladders, chase promotions, or pursue achievements that never satisfy them because they're running from their shadow. They hope that success will silence the inner voice of inadequacy. But when the shadow is faced, ambition transforms. You no longer chase recognition to fill a void. You pursue work that expresses your authentic gifts even if it looks less glamorous from the outside. Paradoxically, this authenticity often leads to greater success because people are drawn to those who are real. Health too is shaped by the shadow. Suppressed emotions don't just disappear, they live in the body. Unacknowledged anger may show up as tension, headaches, or high blood pressure. Buried grief can turn into fatigue or chronic illness. By bringing these feelings to consciousness, by giving them a voice, the body can release what the mind has carried in silence. This doesn't mean shadow work replaces medical care, but it adds a dimension of healing that pills alone cannot touch. Spiritually, integrating the shadow opens the door to a deeper sense of meaning. Many people think spirituality is about escaping darkness, living only in the light. But true spirituality includes both. Night and day, birth and death, joy and sorrow are sacred. Jung believed that God, too, includes both light and shadow, and that by embracing our own, we step closer to the divine. This idea resonates deeply in a culture hungry for authenticity, where many are leaving shallow dogma but still yearning for transcendence. The takeaway is simple yet profound. Your shadow is not here to ruin you. It is here to transform you. Every flaw you admit becomes an entry point to strength. Every wound you face becomes an opening for compassion. Every fear you name becomes a doorway to courage. Integration doesn't mean acting out every impulse. It means learning to relate to your impulses wisely. When you integrate the shadow, you don't become darker, you become brighter. Because the energy once locked in denial now fuels your life. Imagine standing before a mirror that shows your whole self. Not just the image you want others to see, but the hidden twin who has walked with you all along. At first, it's unsettling. You see things you'd rather forget. But then, as you keep looking, you realize, this twin is not your enemy. This twin carries your strength, your passion, your creativity, even your lost joy. To reject it is to reject yourself. To embrace it is to step into freedom. This is the transformation Jung spoke of. Not the fantasy of becoming flawless, but the reality of becoming whole. The shadow archetype teaches that healing is not found in pretending to be perfect, but in welcoming all that you are. And once you do, life changes. You laugh more easily because you no longer have to defend an image. You love more deeply because you see others with compassion. You live more freely because you are no longer at war with yourself. The path is not easy, but it is worth it. Every step you take toward your shadow is a step toward your true self. And when you walk that path, you not only transform your own life, you also light the way for others who are still lost in the dark. The shadow will never disappear completely. It will always walk with you, because to be human is to hold both light and darkness. The task is not to get rid of it, but to learn how to live in relationship with it. When you hide from your shadow, it controls you from the shadows. When you acknowledge it, you gain freedom. Jung often said that the goal of life is not to be good in the shallow sense, but to be whole. Wholeness includes contradiction, complexity, and the courage to stand in the tension between opposites, so the invitation is clear. When you notice the parts of yourself you've rejected, pause. When you catch yourself judging someone harshly, ask what you're seeing in them that you haven't faced in yourself. When you dream of enemies, monsters, or strangers, ask if they might be carrying pieces of your shadow. This awareness doesn't make the shadow vanish, but it loosens its grip. You begin to make choices consciously, instead of being pushed around by hidden forces. The journey with the shadow is not something you finish in a weekend workshop or a single journal entry. It is lifelong. It requires patience, humility, and courage. Some days you'll feel like you've integrated it. Other days it will surprise you again. That's okay. The work is not about perfection. It's about honesty. Every time you choose to face what you'd rather avoid, you grow. Every time you speak truth instead of hiding, you heal. Every time you admit your darkness, your light shines clearer. This is why shadow work is an act of compassion, not just for yourself, but for the world. A person who knows their own shadow is less likely to demonize others, less likely to project hate onto strangers, less likely to create divisions that tear communities apart. When you integrate your own darkness, you become a source of peace. You can hold space for others, because you no longer need to pretend you're flawless. You understand that being human means being complicated, and that compassion begins with seeing yourself fully. So as you finish listening, ask yourself, what part of me have I been running from? What emotion have I buried? What desire have I denied? What fear have I refused to name? Start there, write it down, whisper it to yourself, admit it in the quiet of your heart. That simple act of acknowledgement is the first spark of integration. From there, keep walking, step by step, moment by moment, you will weave the dark and the light together into a richer life. The shadow archetype is your dark twin, but it is also your hidden ally. If you dare to face it, You will discover not only the parts of yourself you feared, but also the gifts you forgot. This is the alchemy of the soul, transforming what was rejected into wisdom, turning hidden wounds into compassion, and reclaiming the energy that was lost in denial. It is not easy, it is not quick, but it is the only path to becoming whole. And so, as Jung would remind us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Don't let fate be a prison. Let it become a doorway. Open the basement door, step into the dark, meet your twin, and walk together toward the light.